Hi everyone, this is Carly from Craig Systems. Welcome back and thank you for joining us for our fourth Security Basics Lunch and Learn. At Craig Systems, we provide tailored voice, data, and security solutions to meet your business needs today and well into the future. We've seen firsthand how cyber attacks can disrupt business operations. So we put together this short, ongoing webinar series to educate our clients because the more you know about digital security, the better you can protect your company, your business, and your data. Each week, we'll introduce a new topic and dive into the basics. Today, we're joined by Shanna Utgard, Success Manager at Defendify, our strategic cybersecurity partner. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Shanna.
Thank you, Carly. So what are we on, week 4 this week? I think
It
so.
is.
So this has been a really fun series. It's one of the things that I look forward to every single week. Today, we are going to be talking about patching, vulnerability scanning, and ethical hacking. As Carly mentioned, I'm Shanna Utgard. I am the Success Manager over at Defendify. We are a SaaS-based cybersecurity platform. We're located right over here in Maine, so not too far away from most of you on this call. This is a little bit about our company. We partner with Craig Systems. They are our strategic partner over in New York area. And we've got a ton of different awards, and a lot of these solutions that we're going to talk about today are available within the Defendify platform. And again, we're going to talk every week. We mention that essentials package, and we're going to talk about the free modules that are included in there as well. So stay tuned to the end. First things first, what is a patch? All right, so most people, for non-technical people, when they think of a patch, we think of like maybe something that we put on jeans or like fabric, to kind of plug a hole, right? So just like a patch of fabric is used to cover up an imperfection, let's say in a pair of pants, a computer software patch is applied to a program or an operating system or even like a piece of hardware to repair a known flaw. So they're really small code changes that help your computer stay updated and secure. So patches can do multiple things. They can address a specific bug or flaw in software, firmware, hardware. They can improve a operating system or just the general stability of an app. Maybe you may have experienced this with an app on your cell phone that you try to do something that you normally do, and all of a sudden it's crashing, and then you'll get a notification that that app has an update available. And even if you kind of look, I personally have an iPhone, so if I go into the store and take a look at the update that's available, usually you'll see right away bug fixes. So any type of software application or even like websites, anything with that code behind it can have these bugs that occur. And then another thing that patches can do is fix a security vulnerability. So speaking of that, CVE is another term that we're going to talk about today. So a common vulnerability and exposure is what CVE means. So there are, security researchers and white hat ethical hackers, people just in the information security world that are looking for these types of bugs and flaws. So the CVE system provides a kind of a list and a forum for known information security vulnerabilities and exposures. So there's a company called MITRE that maintains a big list of all of the known common vulnerabilities and exposures, this big system, this big database. They get some funding from the National Cybersecurity Division of the Department of Homeland Security, and this was officially launched back in September of 1999. It's a big, long database. You can go in there and search anything. I've gone down a rabbit hole before with CVEs. I had somebody one time on a call that said that Apple was so much more secure than any PC, and that there weren't any issues with Apple, and that's why they chose to use Apple devices. And I actually brought this CVE database up and did a search for Windows versus, the iOS, or the Mac OS is actually what I looked at, the Mac OS operating system, to show that there were still quite a few vulnerabilities in the Mac devices that were listed in this big long database. So security researchers will find these known vulnerabilities. They'll submit them into this database. They'll be researched, and if it's confirmed that that is a vulnerability or exposure, it will be assigned a number that will have the year and then the vulnerability number, and then it will be, able to be searched here. Usually what the vendor does at that point is they go in and they make, another small piece of code that goes in and fixes whatever that security vulnerability is. So that's where that patch comes into play. The CVE is discovered, the vendor or manufacturer will go in and basically create a fix, like a little code band-aid, and put that out and release it as a patch or an update to address that CVE, if that makes sense. A zero-day vulnerability is a term that we talk about a lot when it comes to patches and CVEs. So a 0-day is a flaw or a weakness or a bug that may have already been publicly disclosed, but remains unpatched. So the researchers could have disclosed a vulnerability, and the vendor may or may not already be aware of the security issue. An official patch or update that addresses that hasn't been released, or possibly the vendor isn't even aware of the existence of that flaw yet. This is referred to as a 0-day vulnerability because the vendor or developer and then accordingly the users or organizations who are affected by that vulnerability have just learned of it. So literally today is day 0. Once that vulnerability becomes public and that vendor or developer knows about it or has deployed a patch for it, then it becomes known as a end-day vulnerability. So that 0-day vulnerability is a big, it's a big risk for organizations with the applications and software that we're using. Carly and I were talking about this before the actual broadcast of this webinar series. We're talking about these notifications, right? So if you're using a Windows device, you may get this notification that says that there are some updates available and you have to restart your computer to finish installing important updates. It's like Murphy's IT law that this always pops up right when you're in the middle of doing something, and if it restarts your system, you're going to lose the PowerPoint presentation or the document that you were working on. So if you are like most people, you probably snooze this, and you probably also wish that there was a remind me in 3 years option as well. I love this newest window feature. They've got a lot of really interesting headlines on it. We've got change is good. There's a couple other really funny ones. I think it's nice that they put some personality in there. So new features, and then also security updates come through in those patches. So it's always asking you to restart your computer, to pick a time. We also were talking earlier about, iPhones. You get that notification that a new operating system is available, or, you've got apps that need to be updated. So most people, what they end up doing is snoozing these notifications for as long as possible. When this manufacturer has, like when Windows, for example, is releasing that patch, there's most likely a known vulnerability or a bug or something that they're trying to fix in that case. When you start snoozing that on an ongoing basis, you're opening your organization up to certain risks. Obviously, when those CVEs are published in that database, the bad guys are also watching that database. It's not, only something that is available for, business owners and PC users on the good side of things. That's when they're starting to build all of these exploits that are going to use that vulnerability or that flaw in the system and try to exploit it to be able to gain access to computers, or maybe it's they're sending out an email that contains malware that capitalizes on that known vulnerability. So that's kind of when the clock starts ticking for both sides. The more times that you're snoozing this notification, the longer those attackers are having to be able to create malicious programs or files that exploit that known vulnerability. So a great example of this is the Equifax breach. 140 million people were affected by this data breach. Some of the people on this call may have even gotten notification that their name or their social security number or any kind of personally identifiable information was breached in this Equifax incident. So these are specific details that were released by Equifax after the forensic investigation occurred. So it talks about in the end of July, the security team noticed that something was going on. So they continued to monitor and observe that to see what that suspicious activity really looked like. They realized it was something that really wasn't good, so they took the web application offline. Then they continued to do their reviews. The forensic investigation occurred. They brought in, cybersecurity experts to really look into what was going on, and they discovered a vulnerability in the Apache Struts web application framework. That doesn't have to mean anything to you. Just know that it was a CVE that was released, and it was a vulnerability that could be used as an attack vector. And then in the end of July, Equifax patched that web application and then brought it back up online. So for example, here it gives you, this is a CVE number. So that was 2017 was the year of the CVE, and this was the number that it was assigned when it was first reported. This particular vulnerability was disclosed in early March of 2017. The company investigation showed that unauthorized access to files containing personal information occurred from May 13th, was when the attack started, through July 30th. So from early March to early May, this was a known vulnerability that had been released and was not patched by Equifax. So it gives you kind of an idea of how those zero-day vulnerabilities can be used to exploit companies. If this was a patch that had been applied by Equifax early on in knowing about it, it's possible that that breach could have been prevented. So any questions on that? Go ahead and throw them into either the Q&A or the chat. But hopefully that makes sense with the timeline as far as the 0 days being released, the attackers find out about it, and they can actually run scanning tools to find any type of internet connected device that may have vulnerabilities. It's absolutely fascinating to look at these Shodan websites, and you can look at security cameras with known vulnerabilities or firewalls with out-of-date firmware that have vulnerabilities, and you can literally do a search on the entire internet and find every single device that has that particular version running with known vulnerabilities. One of the things that we highly recommend is that your company should be receiving threat alerts. So these are notifications about cyber-related topics. If you use a managed service provider or somebody does your IT, chances are they are the ones that are applying your patches. Some companies that we work with are smaller, and you're responsible for updating your own machines. Maybe you're very small CPA office, and you work out of your home office, and it's just you and your wife that are in the business. You have that obligation to make sure that you are applying all of those updates as soon as you're getting the notification that a new Windows update or a Mac update is available. Making sure that you're receiving ongoing threat alerts and notifications. It might be something like knowing when Microsoft Word has a vulnerability and need to update as soon as possible. We have a threat alert notification service. This is just kind of a quick example of some of the types of threat alerts that go out, but we do a lot as far as zero-day vulnerabilities and application security updates. So whether it's signing up for email notifications from the software or hardware vendors that you have selected to provide services for you, or your IT provider is most likely doing all of these patches and updates for you. So make sure, another side of that as well, if your IT provider gives you specific instructions on what they need you to do to apply those patches. So, some companies need you to make sure that your computer is, still up and running, and that you don't shut it down for the end of the night so that that patch can be applied. If you want to know whether all those applications are up to date, we highly recommend implementing vulnerability scanning. So a vulnerability scanner is a computer program that's designed to scan and assess computers, networks, applications for any known weaknesses. So, any holes, any out-of-date software, they can look for vulnerabilities that arise from misconfigurations. I know a lot of companies that we've been working with have gone to remote work recently, and in order to facilitate that connection from your home internet back into your corporate network, that it requires opening up a tunnel from your home back into the corporate network. And sometimes when you're making the firewall configuration changes to allow that remote connection, it can generate vulnerabilities. Could be, looking for flawed programming within a asset on your network. So it might be like a firewall or your router, a web server, an application server. A vulnerability scan can also notify you about closing risky ports in your firewall or even changing default passwords. So this is an example here of the vulnerability scanning that is available in the Defendify platform. So managing the risk of out-of-date software applications and patch installation, the way to manage that is by ongoing vulnerability scanning. So there's two main types of scanning that we typically encounter. There are several others, but for today, we'll talk about external and internal. So external scans, target the areas of your IT ecosystem that are exposed to the internet. They're not, restricted to your internal users and computers. So this can be, ports, services, applications, websites that need to be accessed by your customers or users outside of your corporate network. So it's looking for holes in your network firewall where malicious outsiders could be able to break in and attack your network. In contrast, an internal vulnerability scan operates inside your firewall. So we're identifying real and potential vulnerabilities that are inside of your business network. So it may be vulnerabilities that could leave you susceptible to damage if a cyber attacker makes it to the inside of your network. One of the most common ways that they can make it inside of your network is by clicking on phishing emails, which was a topic from another week. So if you missed that one, you should definitely check that out. And these internal scans are going to allow you to harden applications and systems that are not exposed to the internet and discoverable by external scans. And one of the other things that we mentioned is default passwords. These scans can also scan IoT devices on the inside of your network. We see a lot of times that default passwords are left on these devices. In 2019, there were 26 billion IoT devices, Internet of Things. So this could be anything from your security cameras to your smart toasters or any type of IP-based devices that are on your network. The default passwords can become a big problem because they can be used to take control of that device and put them as part of a botnet, which is a robot network. So these botnets are a bunch of internet connected devices, and they can be used to send to steal data, send spam. It gives the attacker access to the device and its connection to your network. There was a very large botnet attack back in 2016. It was called the Mirai botnet, and it ended up causing large portions of the internet to go down. Twitter, Netflix, Reddit, these are some big ones that were affected by that. And it was made possible by that malware that was called Mirai. And the computers were, the devices that were infected, they were continuously searching for other vulnerable IoT devices, and they were using those known default usernames and passwords to be able to log in and distribute malware. And a lot of the devices that were affected were like digital cameras, routers, printers, things like that. So making sure that you change default passwords. We did a penetration test report, which we'll talk about, and we got security camera footage from the company because they had left the admin default passwords on the devices. So whether it's your router or your security cameras, make sure that you're changing those default passwords. But a good vulnerability scanning solution can look for those default passwords as well. Um, with the difference between internal and external scanning, we recommend both of them on a monthly basis. But to keep it in the most simplest terms, this is the way that I want you to think about this. Imagine that your business is a house, and the doors and windows are locked to keep intruders from getting inside. But one day, an employee lets a stranger into your office while you're off somewhere else. The stranger is quietly rummaging around and looking for some valuables, gathers them up and takes off with them. So threats to your organization aren't just present outside of your firewall. We make sure that we're locking our windows and our doors of our business to make sure that nobody can get in from the outside. Threats can originate from the internet. I mean, that makes sense to most people. People think that a hacker is trying to get into their network from the outside. What's less commonly understood is threats originating from within the internal network. So somebody just lets the attacker right into the business. Maybe they look online and they see that Mike is the big wig over at Craig Systems, and I come in and I tell Carly that I am here to meet with Mike, and while she's not looking, I go in and I rummage and I steal a bunch of stuff. So they can be invited into the network as well. It could also include insider threats, somebody from your own organization, malware that's been downloaded onto a computer, maybe through a phishing attempt or a USB device, or even just surfing the internet. Once that attacker gains access to that internal network, they can move and identify other systems and services that they wouldn't really be able to see from the internet. So they might not be able to look inside the windows on the outside of your business, but once they get inside, they can really start to look around. So in that house example above, an external scan would check to make sure that all of your doors and windows of your business are locked, while an internal scan would search inside your business to make sure that all of your valuables are safely secured and locked up. The intent with vulnerability scanning is to identify which vulnerabilities exist. If you want to take it a step further, you can perform a penetration test. Vulnerability scanning we recommend you do on a monthly basis. Once a year though, we recommend that you have a white hat ethical hacker, which is what we call good guys doing bad things, that actually attempts to manually exploit any of those vulnerabilities and really try to penetrate your system. A lot of companies want to know, would a bad guy even be able to get into my network? So when you perform a test like this, an ethical hacker will actually attempt to break in the same ways that the bad guys would do. And then they provide back a report that tells you what they were able to accomplish, details about how they got in, screenshots along the way if they're able to extract any information back. And then at the end, they'll give you a risk rating and recommendations on how to prevent those types of break-ins in the future. And like I said, we've seen all kinds of crazy things. A company that had their security cameras wide open to the internet, we got a nice picture of their janitor pushing a mop bucket down the hallway in the evening, and we were able to help them see that and be able to clean that up and harden it. And this particular company dealt a lot with healthcare. So there are certain organizations that really have to look into penetration testing. Anybody in the medical services or that stores health information that is subject to HIPAA, recommend penetration testing or ethical hacking. Any company that is under PCI compliance, so a lot of like banking or financial institutions, any company that that has a web application like Defendify. We do ethical hacking on a regular basis. Another good recommendation, nonprofits are usually asked by their boards or when they're receiving audits to have those penetration tests completed. A lot of manufacturers that we're talking to nowadays, especially with CMMC coming, they're wondering which level they have to be at, and most of those levels are going to include some type of vulnerability scanning or penetration testing. So it's a lot of different types of regulations or laws. The New York Department of Financial Services requires some penetration testing and vulnerability scanning. We're going to have a whole nother section of this Lunch and Learn series that's going to talk about all of these different compliance requirements and what those different industries require. So stay tuned for that another week. And then also some companies that work with large enterprise organizations. So if you've got a really, really, really big client, chances are if they haven't already started to put an enterprise risk management process in place, you should be expecting to get a really long survey asking you about your cybersecurity posture. We run into a lot of companies who get their first cybersecurity assessment, this vendor risk assessment, and it's asking them about their cybersecurity posture, and a lot of the times there are requirements for penetration testing. So if you receive one of those, we can definitely help you out with that. This is a quick little comparison here about how often these are run, the different types of reports. It's a comparison between vulnerability scans and penetration testing. Vulnerability scanning, we recommend monthly, versus a penetration test is once a year. Reports that come back. A penetration test report should be really short, just the actionable items of exactly how far they were able to get in your network. I saw a company that said they had a penetration test completed and they had a 300-page report, and I said, no, this is just a vulnerability scan. It just is telling you what vulnerabilities exist. The metrics will show you risk if a vulnerability is exploited on a penetration test versus a vulnerability scan really is just a list of known CVEs. Who the scans are performed by on the vulnerability side, it's usually your own in-house staff or your managed service provider that uses a scanning tool, versus a penetration test is an outside service. It's a manual infiltration. There's a human behind it that's actually doing it. Expenses for vulnerability scan, usually a lot less, typically a monthly service charge. Penetration testing is much higher. Fortunately, the Defendify service, we've got really good scale that's geared towards small businesses. So if you've ever received a penetration testing quote before, and if you're still recovering from the heart attack that you may have experienced, please contact Mike or any of the people over at Craig, because we can probably help you and also lower the blood pressure a little bit. And then the value that you get from it, both of them are extremely valuable. Vulnerability is really to detect when a piece of equipment could be compromised, and then a penetration test really shows you exactly how far they can get into your network. So we mention this every week, but Craig Systems does have the Essentials package. It includes a cybersecurity health checkup that will help you identify if you even need any of these services. Network vulnerability scanner. So we are going to do the external scan that's going to walk around and see if all of your doors and windows on the outside of your network are closed and locked. If you have any exposed ports or anything like that, this is good for one IP address in this Essentials package. So if you don't know if you've done a vulnerability scan, or if you're interested in finding out, what your network looks like to a bad guy on the outside, we can set you up with that service free of charge. And then also the threat alert system. So keeping you up to date on any of those application security updates or patches that are out there, 0-day vulnerabilities. You want to apply those as soon as possible so that you don't find yourself in one of those situations where an attacker finds it before you do. So one of the things about this is there's no catch. It's no obligation to purchase any other solutions. Just want to make sure that you've got some basic cybersecurity protections in place. You're not going to be asked for a credit card. It doesn't have an expiration date, so you don't have to plug something in and then only have to unplug it a few months later. So it's a completely free service that is being offered. And then speaking of other free services, we're continuing with our Lunch and Learn series to talk about some more cybersecurity basics. Next week is ransomware, which is a fun topic. We're going to actually talk about some events that have happened locally in upstate New York, so stay tuned for that one. I mentioned earlier compliance. So if you are in one of those types of industries, healthcare, manufacturing, financial services in New York, if you are subject to compliance requirements, you won't want to miss that one. Then we're going to talk about annual cybersecurity training versus ongoing awareness. And our last section is the less sexy stuff, but still fun. So every Thursday we're doing this at 12:30 Eastern. Grab your best brown bag lunch or leftovers from the fridge. And if you have any questions or you want to take advantage of those 3 free no strings attached tools, you can call or email my friends over at Craig Systems. Their phone number, email address, and website's right up on the screen. Any questions? I don't see anything come through yet in the Q&A. Give just another second, and if there's no other questions, you can certainly email sales at Craig Systems, and they can answer those for you. And if nothing else, then that's it for me. I'm going to see you same time, same bat channel next week, and we're going to talk about ransomware. Thanks, everybody.